So this is the new movie of Nick Cage. Longlegs came out just this year. The IMDb plot summary: in pursuit of a serial killer, an FBI agent uncovers a series of occult clues that she must solve to end his terrifying killing spree. This is written and directed by Oz Perkins, starring Micah Monroe, Blair Underwood, and Nicolas Cage. So I'll talk about, I guess, Cage first, and then I will kind of get into the thoughts on the movie overall, which for me didn't really work. I was not much of a fan of this film, and the Cage piece of it to me was interesting. He plays the bad guy in the film, and for the first basically two acts, you don't really see him, and that really worked for me. He was scary, honestly. I love horror movies, especially serial killer movies. So him being a serial killer and having this weird affectation and being all in these very odd makeup and weird face kind of prosthetics. It was very creepy until they like fully revealed him. And then honestly, like that, he was a little too offbeat for me. His like the wavelength started becoming more funny than scary. And his performance kind of lost me a little bit. I thought it was better when it was you didn't really see him. The build up to him was much more scary than when he was actually doing these weird stuff. I'm like, okay, this is more goofy. You're not threatening or scaring to me anymore. You're just sort of like silly. And it's like, okay, like this is not it's breaking the spell immediately. But I have a lot of thoughts on the film, but we'll start with Cage, I guess. So what did you think of him on this?
Yeah, I sort of agree in the moment because I had a similar thing of like, yeah, the build up is very scary, and what a clever trick to kind of just film him from like lower. So you only see like half of his face because it's from a kid's point of view, hence the name Long Legs, I suppose, as well. And that was very scary and creepy. But you're right, like when he does show up and you see all of him, in the moment I was like, yeah, this is Nick Cage, doing a bit. And
Mm-hmm.
it, despite all the prosthetics, it didn't feel transformational enough to me, and it felt kind of goofy. Having said that, I think the movie, and we'll get into the movie, is effective on many levels to me.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it did lose me at some point, but I think Nick Cage himself, there is something about maybe his look, or I don't know, the demonic kind of inner core of him, that it has stayed with me since I
Oh,
watched
okay.
the movie.
Oh, okay. You've been
And
haunted by long legs.
a little bit, at
Uh-oh.
least the first night, and like that face
Mm.
has sort of stayed with me. And as I think about it, and maybe this is colored a little bit because I heard the director talk about the movie and such, and so maybe this influenced me, which is that ultimately this is not a demon, who's meant to be overarchingly scary as it would be in a regular horror movie, which granted I don't watch that many horror movies, so
Mm.
I'm no subject matter expert in this. But the point to me is that he's just a regular guy who's just creepy and sick and bad. And that's what's effective about him. That it's just another person and kind of goofy, but also scary and terrible. And that is why it's effective. And I think that is why his portrayal is sort of stayed with me, because this could have been like a total transformation on not so over the top, less goofy, like a typical horror movie villain. And
Mm-hmm.
that would have kept, I think, the audience at a distance, but perhaps more terrifying in the moment. But then you wash your hands off and you're done. I'm typically like that with horror movies. It's like, oh, this is real, and often I'm looking away when whatever stuff is happening, not because I'm scared, but mostly I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I think, deeper, because this is just another person, who looks really weird and off, but you know somebody, yeah, he's not a proverbial monster. He's a monster otherwise, but not a typical monster as you would expect. So I don't know, I think it did work on me, even though in the moment I had a similar thought as you.
Yeah, like I am in the same ilk as you in terms of the type of horror movies like I mentioned that are very scary to me. I do like the serial killer films, Silence of the Lambs, Manhunter, and the villains
Yeah.
in those movies like Buffalo Bill and Dollaride and I guess also Hannibal Lecter are very scary because they are just normal people doing crazy things. And I think what this movie does, and maybe this is getting to my thoughts on the film overall, is it starts out very much like a serial killer movie, which I do find very effective. A
Yeah,
lot of, I think they were trying to, set in the 90s, so I feel like they were referencing, again, Silence of the Lambs, Seven. That was like a
yep,
golden age of like serial killer movies. And then when the movie's in the third act sort of takes a twist into the supernatural, where it becomes a
yeah,
lot more about the devil specifically. Personally, like I'm not afraid of the devil. Maybe the devil's now gonna get at me because he's like, oh, you're not afraid of me or something like that. But I'm not. Like I those types of movies that involve like very
yeah,
religious horror or the actual devil versus just demons are scary. But the
yeah,
actual devil, it just doesn't really work for me. And when the movie turned into basically a movie about the actual devil being put into these dolls and Nicolas Cage is like a devil worshiper, that's when I'm like, okay, this is just isn't scary to
yeah,
me, or it's not the movie I thought it was. Like I
yeah,
was going on for the ride on the serial killer aspect of it, and then that's where the movie lost me. But that's my own personal taste. Like I know a lot of
yeah.
people love not love the devil. I mean, yeah, I guess there are some Satanists out there, but I mean, some people love devil horror movies, and that's just a genre that's never worked for me. So that was a bit of a disappointing twist, and I think that's also why the Nicolas Cage's performance didn't become as scary in the end when I realized, like, okay, he is a serial killer, but he's doing this because he worships Satan, and there actually is this Satan, like, black mist that is doing this thing. I'm like, okay, that's when I
Yeah.
stopped being afraid, I guess. And I go into these movies, horror movies, because I like to be scared. And this one started off scary, but then,
Totally with you. I think the build-up is amazing. Micah Monroe, but I've never seen her before. I thought she was great. The movie is
yeah.
set up amazingly. Like, again, I don't watch that many horror movies, but typically my view of horror movies that they're just not mounted really well. This is really mounted super well. Like all departments really work in harmony, and the suspense of it and the thrill of it is all incredible, but it's very restrained. It's not for jump scares, even though there are a few jump scares, but that's not what this is about. It's actually a lot deeper and psychological, and you can tell from the very beginning that something has happened with Micah Monroe's character,
Hmm.
where at first you sort of feel like this is a very odd, quirky, sort of like, but really smart and sharp person who's really good at her job of being an FBI agent and seems to get this. But then as the movie goes on, but even though, I mean, she does such a great job of not letting you fully know, because she doesn't know either that
Hmm.
she's actually had an experience with Longlegs when she was younger. So her trauma, or whatever you want to call it, sort of so deep rooted inside of her that you can sort of see it, but I don't think she can see it. So it's such a great meta level of acting that not you're not fully sure, because she's not fully sure of what's happened, but yet she seems to have a connection with all of this and is many steps ahead. So all that is great. But yeah, the whole devil and doll and this whole black ball thing, and spoilers by the way, whoever is
Oh.
listening to this, none of that really works, because it's yeah, I'm not into it. And I just was like, oh, this movie would have been so much more effective if it were not about this, and it was just about this regular human being who's just bad and creepy,
Right.
you know. And maybe I won't spoil this part, like the accomplice and him, sure, maybe they were bounded by the same interests of the devil or what have you, but
Hmm.
I wished it was not a supernatural thing, that they were doing this in like an actual physical way, as opposed to this whole doll situation. It's a bummer. I know, I'm sure other people who are horror movie lovers, they're probably into it and maybe it works better. It didn't ruin the movie. I mean, the movie was very well made up to that point. I just think the movie would have been, I hate using the word masterpiece, but it would have been like a masterpiece level movie, I think, if the ending was, or the third act was just not supernatural.
Yeah, yeah, and I think like you said, the craft of the film, and I loved how there were all those locked cameras where
Mm,
the character is like a long lens, so you see a lot more of the background. You're like, hey, is something gonna happen? But nothing
yeah.
happens, but it's like it keeps you on edge. That I thought was great, and the look of the film also, again, and a big homage back to those '90s serial killer movies. But just yeah, the third act, the supernatural stuff, the way that they info dump you the entire story in the last 10 minutes and be like, okay,
Oh
here's
yeah,
what
that
happened.
too.
That seemed kind of sloppy and rushed. And
Lazy.
I
Yeah.
just, yeah, I just like, okay, like this is so I wouldn't. I think it sounds like you might have liked it more than I did. I wouldn't call it anything that's close to some incredible film, but that I think this is a director who now I'm going to be paying a little more attention to.
Yeah,
And I think it was cool of Nicolas Cage to take on a role like this that is not. Yes, it's the title character, but it's not the main character. He's barely
yeah,
on screen, and it's something he hasn't done in this way before too. And I think that's also the gimmick of this movie, of the marketing of this movie, of like Nicolas Cage is a crazy serial killer. Okay, I want to see what that is. Like that intrigues me of like what is he going to do? And he
hmm,
does something that I wasn't expecting, this weird kind of dead glam rocker zombie thing that was it just was very weird. And I'm sure a lot of that was what he wanted because he brings his own kind of spin on
yeah,
things. So that I at least was something that Nicolas Cage worked in that way for me, even though again I wish they had kept him a little more off screen. Some of the places, some of his reactions, like just were too goofy for me. But I'm glad he did something like this. I thought that that was the main draw. I mean, not obviously for the podcast because he's Nicolas Cage, but for me and seeing this, that would have made me curious and want to see the movie because of Nicolas Cage, less so the trappings of the rest of this movie and kind of what it was about.
yeah. Yeah, the more I think about it, I think he's pretty amazing in the movie. I think the story doesn't serve the movie well, like we
Yes.
were talking about. And I think this director is still upcoming. As you were talking about him, I just was thinking of Heath Ledger and the Joker.
Mm,
It's sort of in the same register in a way that this is a goofy person who's just really traumatized and traumatic and just bad. But the way, obviously, I mean, that movie's in a different register
sure,
completely,
sure.
but the way Nolan is able to capture just the madness and the goofiness of the Joker, but make it feel so scary, but also thrilling at the same time. It's hard to do that. And, there are moments where I do think when Nick Cage is driving in the car and screaming and yelling like that, I thought was very effective. But unless Oz Perkins' point was to make it even goofier, but he could have. I think what I'm trying to say is that there's maybe a little bit of a gap between what the director is able to extract versus what Nick Cage is giving. Because I think Nick Cage is given everything,
As he always does.
as he
Right.
always does. Exactly. So
Exactly.
it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
on him. I
Right.
think that said, it worked on me. That
Mm.
face has stayed with me. So, you know, it's pretty. I won't even use the word terrifying. It is terrifying, of course it is, but there's some other deep rooted thing there. I can't explain it. There's something about the makeup and the jowls and the goofy sort of laugh. And he almost looks like a drag queen in a
Hmm.
way.
Hmm.
There's something very off about this person. And I think that worked on me.
Right. And I think that's what makes these serial killers in these movies too, like so terrifying because when they seem offbeat and weird, you don't know what they're going to do. And
Right.
unpredictability is scary, especially if this person could unpredictably kill you. And I
Right.
think that's why he's works so well as Nicolas Cage as a serial killer. Again, is all I need to know. Be like, okay, that sounds super interesting. And yeah, he was offbeat. It just like actually the car scene that you mentioned there, those are the scenes that didn't really work for me as much. I was like,
Oh,
okay, like you're giving a little bit too much of now just like the typical Nick Cage like screaming about the beast or Wicker
I
Man
know
or
I
something,
felt
you
that
know?
way while watching it, but later on, I mean, I think about it,
Oh,
it
okay.
works on me.
That's cool. I mean, hey, that's Nick Cage. Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.